And I'm going to focus on just one of the events. We're actually both going to focus on one event, which is the Pseudonychia event. There was also a Dinophysis bloom, but it didn't turn out that it was producing toxin. So we'll skip that one for now. In an audience with industry members, the first thing that I want to point out is that, yes, managing ASP is required by the National Shellfish Sanitation Program. So that was a question that I was asked quite a few times. You know, are you inventing something new to control? I don't really need more to do, so we only do what we have to, believe me. There is an established limit for ASP. It's set at 20 micrograms per gram, and other states have had closures in the past, and they do routine testing. And the second most important question people ask is, you know, what the hell happened? Well, we don't really know. I mean, we're trying to get a better idea on Pete Countway. Dr. Countway is here from Bigelow, and he'll be able to shed a little bit of light on the work that was done to try and figure out what had happened. Biotoxin in Maine, so sort of the normal scenario that we've been living with for decades is basically red tide, or PSP is our big challenge. It's common in the Gulf of Maine. We have a monitoring program for it that starts with phytoplankton, and then we monitor toxin in shellfish. We have regional mussel closures now. Those are about maybe 5 years old, where we close basically big swaths or almost the entire coast of Maine for mussel harvest, but leave select areas open for wild harvest and aquaculturists, and that way it allows us to put our resources into testing more important or more commercially important species. We do memorandums of understanding with the industry to leave those particular areas open. We have species-specific closures, so lots of times the closures start with mussels and European oysters and then expand to soft-shell clams or to other species. And there's tons of historic data, and you know, we pretty much have this one covered through decades of practice. ASP, amnesic shellfish poisoning, is not so normal. There's a lack of historic data. Pseudonychia, which is the phytoplankton that causes or can cause amnesic shellfish poisoning, is commonly observed in phytoplankton samples, so we've seen it for a long time, but it doesn't always make toxin. Part of the contingency plan, so monitoring for Pseudonychia and counting it and testing has been part of our contingency plan for a long time, but we never measured any toxicity until 2012. And I sort of put an asterisk there because I think probably decades ago there was testing that was done. There was only a mouse test at the time, I believe, for it, and I think there were levels that were detected, but never anything actionable. And when I've talked to other people at the department, they basically said, yeah, we checked around for it, we never saw anything, so we just stopped testing. So in 2012, we saw the need to develop a routine monitoring program and also make sure that we had access to the approved method for testing to reopen, because if there's a closure, you do have to use the approved method to reopen. So what ASP monitoring in Maine looks like is that we started a regular routine monitoring program in 2014 with established stations using the HPLC UV method for shellfish. And we ran less than 100 samples per year according to the criteria in our contingency plan. And at the time, that was at 15,000 cells per liter if we counted Pseudonychia. And we had 2 positive tests on the phytoplankton in the water that showed toxin, then we test shellfish. So the ASP event in 2016, we saw Pseudonychia counts that were, you know, kind of, I put in quotes, high, 5,000, because these cells can go up to 2 million and way more than that. So this is kind of what we're calling high now, is 5,000, but it's really pretty subjective. Shellfish samples had no toxicity through early September, and in late September, shellfish samples were over the limit. We closed most of eastern Maine, so anybody who was impacted by this closure, it was pretty dramatic. This is kind of what it looked like. I just pulled some phytoplankton data for one station, and I'm going to show two charts here. I want you to notice the scale up to 60,000 cells per liter on this graph here. So these are all of these are sampling points where we're seeing no phyto, and then we get this little uptick. Then it goes from there in 1 week to here, which is over 40,000 cells per liter, then to 50,000 cells per liter, and on 9/27, we had shellfish were testing at 84 micrograms per gram, which is way over the limit. So I'm going to show you this from 2015. So remember the scale on the last one was 60,000. This is 140,000 cells per liter. This looks pretty similar. Even this initial spike looks similar. But on this state here, you've got well over 120,000 cells per liter and basically no toxin in the shellfish at all. So the take home is that cell counts don't really mean a whole hell of a lot unless you know what exact cells you're looking at. So what was the difference? The 2016 Pseudonychia bloom was dominated by Pseudonychia australis, and Dr. Countway is going to get into that a lot more than I do here. The occurrence of australis was not previously documented in the Gulf of Maine. So we weren't looking for it because we didn't think it happened here. It does happen in Europe. I think in Ireland there have been some instances, and on the West Coast and in Canada, but we hadn't seen it in the Gulf of Maine before. And it can be toxic at low cell counts. So that was the difference in those graphs. The Maine ASP recall, so as lots of you in the industry know that we did recall 1 week of mussel harvest and one lot of quahogs that were wet stored. We also recalled clams from 3 days of harvest, and almost 11,000 pounds of product were impacted. We got 96% recovered and destroyed, and I'd just like to compliment the industry members who are part of this. That's a extremely impressive recall rate. It was not easy, and people were extraordinarily cooperative, and as a result, we had no illnesses. So I was really proud of the partnership between DMR and the dealers. The impact of to industry, this tens of thousands of dollars in direct losses. Recalls are kind of the worst. And plus market share. This has been described to me that once you have something like a recall, there's all the feelings about a recall, but also when people have their spots in markets, it's difficult to get them back. These are the kind of headlines we were seeing: brain-damaging toxin closes down east, shellfish industry recalled shellfish from Maine contaminated with amnesia causing neurotoxin, shellfish closure expanded, cost to industry mounts. So that was the bad news. The good news is that nobody got sick, and this is exactly what the National Shellfish Sanitation Program is for. So there's a reason that we do this, and it did work. We learned a lot, which was good, and the good communication with industry resulted in a pretty effective relationship. I don't think that I'm overstating that, but it could be. I'm a bit of a Pollyanna. No risk to public health for other species. We did test urchins, lobsters, crabs, and whelks, and we didn't see an impact. There was some toxin in lobster tamales, which was not surprising because we do see red tide or PSP in lobster tamale as well. There was a short closure compared to what the West Coast experienced in 2015. They were closed for, I think, somewhere along 4 months for their crab fishery. Partnerships with researchers like at Bigelow and Woods Hole were really effective, and we collaborated at the time with other states because there were also blooms and closures in Massachusetts and Rhode Island around the same time. So the bad news is that we can't tell the Pseudonychia species apart with just regular light microscopy, so that's not good. Some Pseudonychia species are more toxic at low cell counts, which I already discussed. And other Pseudonychia species only make toxins sometimes, and that's not well understood. Hopefully I'm not saying anything wrong, Pete. Toxin accumulates at the same rate in mussels and softshell clams. We did some comparison testing to see if they behaved the way they do with red tide, where mussels will get toxic first and clams will get it a little bit later. That did not seem to be the case with Pseudonychia. The clams got toxic as fast as the mussels. And we need to do more monitoring in the future, which is going to require more funds. I think we're just going to have to do a lot of testing to make sure we don't get, that we catch something like this again. So a little more good news is that we received a research grant to better monitor shellfish poisoning. We got money to buy a new HPLC machine to do dedicated ASP sampling because we anticipate we did something like well over 400 samples, I think, last year versus the less than 100 the year before. The next steps, revise the contingency plan, install our new HPLC machine at DMR, and determine the dominance of the bloom. I don't know whether that's possible or not. Our new contingency plan is that we're recording now the dominance of whether we have small cell or large cell pseudonychia, which might help us know what's going on with the community. And then 2,000 cells per liter in a positive Scotia kit, or so showing positive toxin in the phytoplankton at 2,000 cells per liter, we're going to go right to shellfish testing versus the 15,000 cells per liter previously. So that's all I had.